So this is a basic template that we quite often use. Now you heard Marchu in the previous session use the wonderful term about your North Star. So by that, we mean the purpose, the thing that you focus on, the thing that drives the strategic decisions that you make. And you can see across the top of this theory of change, you've got 3 red boxes. We call those our framing statements. They're really important. That's where we start when we're building a theory of change. What's the need or the problem that you exist to respond to? What's your vision? What's the big vision? What's the thing that you'd love to see happen over time? And then that box on the right, really important, purpose. What is your purpose as an organisation? What's that North Star that we've heard mentioned? And then from there, we drop down and we work unconventionally from right to left. So that's where we start thinking about the outcomes. No magic there, it's simply the change that is experienced. So that's your model of a theory of change. Duncan is actually going to show the Northpoint one later, so you can see what a filled-in version of that looks like. So just a reminder, when Duncan's talking, if you've got questions, please do pop them into the Slido tool or make a note of them for afterwards. And then we'll get to them towards the end of the session. But for now, handing over to you.
Okay, morning everybody. Can you all hear me? Is the mic working right? I've decided I'm going to stand over here. The table's great, but I feel like we're on top of each other. So morning, my name's Duncan Pearce. You know when you stand at the front of these things, you sort of get a phone call out of the blue and it's like, can you come and stand at the front and talk? You think, yeah, that would be lovely, a day out of the office. And then you get in and you think, blimey, people think I'm an expert at something. This doesn't happen very often, but it's really nice to be here. What I hope I can bring is some really honest kind of feedback, I guess, about some of the experiences that I've had. So I'll just talk very briefly about what kind of led me to be where I am, just so you get a bit of context. And then I'll talk about 2 organisations, and they're both different. And I've worked with Trust Impact with both organisations, and I was chief exec at both organisations. Currently, I'm chief exec at Northpoint. It was really interesting when Matt spoke about talking about impact first and not talking about turnover and size of people. Number of people, and I knew what my slide said. So yeah, there you go. Definitely not the expert in the room. However, I think I'd like to say it does bring some context, and hopefully it'll be encouraging for people to see that the process works equally well with organisations of different sizes and in different situations. So. My background is largely 25 years-ish. You kind of get to a point, don't you, where you don't want to say exactly, but sort of 20, 25 years of working in third sector, largely young people's organisations, but then more recently, for the last 3.5 years, I've been working at Northpoint, which is a mental health organisation working sort of out of Yorkshire and in that sort of area. I guess for 10 years of my career before I became chief exec, I worked for Catch-22, which some people might know, and I sort of, did all sorts. Started off as a project manager working on an estate in the middle of Rochdale, and sort of progressed my way up. And sort of 10 years later, I was ops director for them, running sort of large teams of national programs working across the country. So had lots of different experiences and access to lots of different pieces of work across education, justice, children and families work. What was really interesting when I started thinking about this is that, and I think that, whilst I was involved in all sorts of strategy work when I was in that role, because I wasn't the CEO or I wasn't the responsible person for strategy, it was only when I moved to Endeavour as my it was actually my second CEO role, but it was the first one where I felt I was able and in a position to actually embark on a new sort of strategy for an organisation. And it was only then that you get that. I think it was a real sense of responsibility to get it right. And if I'm honest, previously I felt like I was a great contributor to strategy, but I wasn't responsible for it, so that was okay. And I think what I learned when I sort of started with Endeavour is it's really important to get it right, but it's really hard. So let me just tell you very quickly about the 2 organisations. You can sort of read the bits there, but the point to this is that both organisations were both organisations were in situations where they had a new CEO, and they, for different reasons, there was probably a little bit lack of trust. Whether that's because in the sense of Endeavour, you know, it's a huge history, 80 years of doing what it did. And then I kind of rock up and say, well, yeah, that's great, but that isn't actually what's needed now. And also, it isn't actually what you're doing now, even though it's still what you say you do. So I suppose it's that challenge. You know, you start challenging people that are so passionate about the work and the organisation that they work for. So that I think was really interesting. Obviously, it was a smaller organisation. The financial sustainability, it was difficult, it was challenging, it was really kind of going through a time where there was almost a question about, is it sustainable, should we be doing it, or should we be trying to merge or even wrap it up as an organisation, which is really difficult for an organisation like that. And then coming to Northpoint, just for contrast, much bigger organisation, working largely as a delivering public sector contracts for NHS trusts. Again, adult mental health services and young people, a lot of young people and schools work. But again, I came in, my predecessor had been there for 17 years, had kind of grown the organisation from, you know, quite small up to where it was. And so again, you've got somebody, you know, who's coming in who's just different to how it's been and asking different questions and wanting to kind of do things differently. So I think in both cases, working with Trust Impact, and I probably need to say, I am a fan of Trust Impact, so I'm not being paid to be here, but genuinely, I think what they bring to the table as a leader going through this process, in whatever situation your organisation is, it is tremendously helpful having their expertise kind of alongside you in the framework and the structure and the tools that they bring. So that's probably the sort of context. I suppose in terms of it might be worth just going to the next slide, please. There's a few things. Both organisations really benefited from going through a theory of change, and the fundamental thing that I think that it did in both cases is it allowed you to challenge thinking and eventually get to an agreement on the future and the direction of the organisation. And I think what was really interesting is when we were doing it in both cases, we did the theory of change ahead of doing the strategy. And I think that was really important, and it really worked well, because ultimately, you know, you look at your mission, or your vision and your purpose, and you get all of those things right. They're there for the long term for organisations. But fundamentally, what is it that you want to do? What is that impact that you want to make? And you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't know the impact that you want, it's not going to be effective. And so that was the thing that really kind of worked. So the theory of change is a great piece of work to do ahead of the strategy developing and coming from it. It definitely brings people to the same place. And for me, when we get to the next screen, and you can kind of see the impact statement, that's what anchors everything together. You know, I talk really regularly. I don't particularly talk about our strategy, although clearly I should. What I talk about is what is our impact statement, and is what we're doing making a difference to that. Back to that thing, it's not a short piece of work, so it has to stand the length of time. And I think in both cases, I mean, Endeavour's still using the theory of change that we did 5 years ago. I would expect that to continue. It's not changed, whilst the strategy alongside it will be tweaked and changed. And where we are now in Northpoint, you know, our impact statement is absolutely got longevity, which will, you know, hold the organisation in really good kind of stead. I think taking people on the journey, I was having a conversation previously with Stephen, isn't it? I think, and we're just talking about how do you take kind of trustees or senior leaders with you when you bring in the idea of doing this kind of piece of work, and it's really interesting. There is often kind of resistance to kind of working with consultants and the new sort of shiny toys, or the things. I mean, when I was at Endeavour, there was somebody who'd been on the board for 40 years. Now, I do appreciate that's not great governance, But trying to kind of change the mindset of people that are really kind of ingrained in what they do is difficult. The thing that working with Trust Impact does is it allows you as the leader to be in the conversation, and you're not then having to facilitate those difficult pieces. And the other thing that I think, if I'm allowed to talk about it, is the tool that really opens up the conversation that Trust Impact uses, the strategic tensions slider. And some of you may know, I think it was on your website for a long while, I don't know if it still is. But what it does is it really, really gets to the nub of the question in the room. And we've done it where we've had managers, representatives from frontline workers, trustees, senior leaders, all kind of coming together, sitting in the room, and then, you know, having a facilitated conversation, but then being able to vote on actually what do people think, and it come up as a live response, and then you have a really meaningful conversation. So I think the ability to have a structure and a process that takes you through brings an awful lot to the process. And then I guess the final piece is that the theory of change, in my mind, you can talk about the activity that you do, the number of people that you see. You can talk about, you know, we talk, just to say we're not at the end of this journey, so we haven't got this to where we need to yet. But, you know, we can talk about the fact that we deliver in 290 community venues across Yorkshire and all of those kind of things. They're all great activities, great outputs. And actually, we also know that most people that leave our service, you know, they feel better than when they started, because we do our benchmarking questionnaires. But what we don't really know is the so what, you know, in terms of that impact, you know, in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months, you know, are they living a better life because they're now better able to manage their mental health as they kind of progress. So being able to kind of really drill down on what is the impact that you want to make then allows you, and I've put commercialisation really deliberately, you know, we all work in the third sector, and I suspect that we're all astute enough to know that the numbers really matter in terms of, you know, pounds. We absolutely need to be able to say to our commissioners and the people that are funding us that actually, you know, there is value to what we do. And you can only do that, I think, if you measure and are able to measure the impact, not the activity. And so being able to kind of do that, and the theory of change really kind of helps you to hone in on what is the impact that you want to measure, and then you can really start to have stronger conversations and influence the commissioners and the funders. There was a conversation, you know, just earlier in the fireside chat talking about, you know, we respond to what commissioners and funders need. Actually, we ought to be able to talk about the impact that we need to make is this, and this is the reason, and then getting their mindsets to change. I think I'm probably going to pause there. Let's have a look at this. So I'll just give you a second to kind of take this in. The top bit in purple is the sort of you know, the problem that we're trying to solve, our vision and our purpose. And then, as you can see, you know, there's a sort of flow to where we are. But I just keep coming back to this bit. Whenever I look at the theory of change, this is the bit that just you're able to hold on to. You know, in every single conversation, is what we're doing allowing people to have a better experience of mental health support? And that could be the beneficiaries. That could be the families and the carers of the people that we work with. It could be the system itself, so our people working in the system, our colleagues that are delivering the services, are people having a better experience of mental health. And the thing that just really kind of, I guess it was that kind of light bulb moment, is we can measure that. You know, we can absolutely measure whether or not people are having a good experience along the way and start to understand what that means. So we're in a position where we've had this theory of change for 3 years. It's interesting, we are about to revise it, and we'll probably talk a little bit about why we're revising it in the next bit. But for me, it really stands true in every conversation I have, whether it's with, you know, one of our colleagues that's delivering services, whether it's with the senior leaders, the trustees, commissioners. It allows us to really articulate and talk about the impact that we're wanting to do. Our challenge and where we are in the journey is now getting to a place where we've got the right data to be able to then sort of prove that we are making that impact.
Thank you, Duncan. I think if I wasn't already a fan of theory of change, that definitely would have kind of reinforced that. And thank you for sharing your reflections on that. So we've got 3 top tips, the sort of the takeaways, which we'll have a quick conversation about, and then I'll come to you for any questions. So the first of those, so Duncan, I know from having worked with you through this process that you didn't just get a small number of people together and run a workshop process only with them, that you actually involved the whole organisation. And there's something in that Duncan and I have had a few conversations on the lead up to this. And what I really liked about the way you did that was you used the whole you involved the whole organisation. You didn't treat theory of change as something different to strategy. And I just wonder if you could say a little bit about that, because for those of you who are doing this, on this journey, thinking about it, it might be quite helpful to know how you do it.
And I think it is different. We did it across both the organisations. One organisation had sort of 20 people in, and where we are now, I think we're at about 250, but it was slightly less than that when we set out. The thing is, even as most people in our organisations come into work because they want to make a difference to people, and they want to be having those certainly in the organisation that we're in at the moment, it's all about one-to-one or group work with individuals that are struggling and they want to make a difference. But I think it's really important, and this has always been my kind of mantra really, is that people need to understand how the organisation works, to understand why we do things that then allow them to do the work that they do. So I mentioned, it's really important that people understand the numbers. I never shy away from talking about the fact that we aren't not-for-profit. We just do something different with the profit. So we absolutely need to cover our costs. We need to make a profit. We need to be able to invest. And this is the same thing, really. Why have a strategy? Why go to the length of and time and effort to do all of this work? Is because it impacts on our ability to sustain the organisation and to have longer term conversations with funders and commissioners to be able to win new work in new areas, develop new relationships. And all of that comes back down to the impact statement of more people experiencing better mental health. So in terms of how we did that, we opened up the conversation. I think we had about 6 or 7 events where we, full day events where we brought people together. We, using that kind of term, we socialised the concept, we picked, we challenged, we flip charted it, we post-it noted it. We probably wouldn't do that now. We'd use Slido and things like that, wouldn't we? But and we allow people to really engage in it and hear their views on, were we pushing in the right direction? Was it the things that kind of were motivating them? And the reality is that, and I've genuinely, again, I've reflected on this, on sort of thinking about this session, is it's really interesting how people that wouldn't ordinarily or you wouldn't ordinarily expect to be excited and engaged in kind of the strategy of an organisation are having really meaningful conversations, and they get the amount of times that people kind of stop and, when you're sort of going around services and you start having a conversation, you realise that they're really, really bought into the sort of the whole process, the strategy and the impact piece.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. And then our final top tip on here, you already mentioned that actually, using your theory of change to help you communicate with confidence. It's amazing what the power of a good purpose statement or a good impact statement is. Yes, it absolutely aligns the organisation, its board, etc. around it, but it also allows you to have those really powerful, quite transformational conversations. This is who we are, this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is the difference we make. So theory of change is not an end unto itself. It is very much a tool which helps you to develop your strategy, to understand the impact that you have, and then to communicate that with confidence. I'm going to open up for some questions, if that's all right, Duncan. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing your reflections on that. So I can see we've got quite a few in. Thank you for those. The one that has been upvoted, is that a verb? I don't know. Who do you need to include in the development of theory of change, and where should the balance of power lie? Board, staff, stakeholders? And the clue might be in the word balance, actually.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think for me, it probably does depend on I guess the stage and the maturity of your relationship in the organisation that you're doing the work with. So there's a couple of kind of options, isn't there? One is that you kind of pass it out and you let kind of people from within the organisation really kind of own it. But that's in kind of contrast to the fact that, you know, we're all in leadership roles because we believe that we know best, right? And no, I'm just kidding. But that you have a view and you have a vision, and part of your role is to kind of sell that and to take people with you and arguably to back yourself. So we definitely had a really broad mix in our working group. We had a really broad mix. We deliberately had people that you would consider to be your early adopters and the people that are interested in this, but also it's really important that you've got the naysayers in there, so that actually you can bring them as well. And I think that's often your measure of, you know, if you can get somebody who's quite set in their ways to start to think differently, then you probably know that what you're producing is the right thing. So I think a real mix. The balance of power, ultimately, I felt like I needed to be able to kind of own it from a, you know, new leader in an organisation, but having the trustees alongside and really getting them to understand it was really important as well.
Yeah. So in a theory of change workshop, typically we might have up to about 12 people, and we normally say to people, a couple of trustees in there would be great, but it is about that diversity of perspectives. So people who've been in the organisation a long time versus less time, people working at different, if you've got a hierarchy at different levels within the organisation. Have I got a hand in the room? Oh. Rule breaker, go on Kate, go ahead.
Now you've said it's a good question, I'll admit I was the one who asked it.
I just said that because I felt I had to, yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. I can relate to particularly the company group that on the left-hand side of the screen, the characteristics of the first organisation.
Yeah, Endeavour, yeah.
Very similar to the one that I'm in now as Director of Operations. We're actually a company limited by guarantee. We're a membership organisation. The majority of our members are charities, some are CSCs.
Yep.
We are governed by an executive committee of 17, and with 3.5 FTE as an executive team, which is why I kind of asked about the balance of power. Not least because our executive committee is made up from within the membership. So what they do, and yes, I'm doing a performance review in 2026, is wear their chief executives of their respective organisation hats when they come to the executive committee, which is a real challenge for us.
Yes.
And to both of you, when you talk about a workshop, for example, it would be very, you know, if we have 20, for example, it would be very lopsided in terms of using the executive team versus executive committee. So I'm wondering your view on bringing other stakeholders, whether they be, but we're not beneficiary facing, but we're close to we work in the armed forces charity sector. We're close to the armed forces community. We're lucky enough to have just secured grant funding from the MOD. We work very closely with other funders in the sector, not as recipients of funders, but to help inform and influence their funding strategy and priorities. So what are the risks and opportunities of involving other stakeholders out with your executive team and your board?
So I think in the way that you've described that, I think it seems really sensible. I think you know, bringing in people that understand the landscape and are able to kind of understand the challenges and the pressures, because the reality is, I don't know about, I mean, I came down from Leeds last night, having had a trustee meeting last night, and I've got absolutely fantastically engaged group of trustees, but they're not all experts in the sector that we work in. You know, they bring their skills, and so I think actually it would really enrich the conversation and address that kind of you know, voice and balance of power probably. So I don't know, Adrian, if you've probably experienced doing that.
Yeah, and I would definitely say you can end up with too many cooks in the kitchen, but there is a question of who's involved versus who's informed as well. So you can go through a process like this, and what it will do, it's a bit of a Trojan horse. It will highlight where you have challenges with governance, but it won't sort it out. I would always keep the conversations when you're dealing with lots and lots of stakeholders at the level of those framing statements across the top. What's your purpose? What are the outcomes? And I would steer clear of, and therefore what are our activities? I would stay very much in the sort of big picture space, because otherwise you will end up with a mass of different perspectives. But if you can orientate around a handful, 3, 4, 5 outcomes, then you can go away and enact, I think. Did I see a hand in the front?
And we just to say as well, the other thing is, you know, we had that working group, and that sort of really did the work, but then we took it back to the full trustee board, to the full leadership team, etc. So yeah, there's definitely a process that allows for sort of feedback and it's that balance between, you know, you can see this, you can comment on it, but you can't change it because this is what the group, you know. So I think setting the parameters out at the beginning about the remit of that working group, and allowing, you know, the board of trustees to think about from within that, who do they want to be on the group, you know, and the same from the leadership team, the same from across the organisation, and then you can hold on to that and say no, this was the remit, this was the format, and this is how we're moving it forward.
So I've got one question at the front, and I'm going to give us a time check. Your next session starts in 4 minutes, so we're going to have to be quite swift. And I've got one more lovely question on here, which I might just end with. So do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Tom Lawson from Centre West. I'm interested about how you included lived expertise in the design of the theory of change and where the co-production partners are in that workshop. Yeah,
we didn't do enough of it, I think. As an organisation, Northpoint, that's part of, I guess, where we're going next. We work with a lot of partners that do a lot of it, and we have access to kind of hear feedback and understand, you know, the experiences of the beneficiaries. So that, I guess, is taken on, but it wasn't explicit enough in our process. In the Endeavour one, it was much easier because we did have young people on site, you know, in alternative education setting, and we would have kind of contribution from them. But I think, again, you know, it's interesting. We're 3 years into our 3-year strategy. We're just thinking about the next one, and already we know that lived experience has to be part of what we're working on next. So it's a good question, but I can't say that we did it well.
Yeah, and it does very much vary in the context that you're working in. So some organisations that we work with have almost separate lived experience panels, and that's a whole different conference summit, isn't it? It's that question of how do you do that meaningfully in a way that doesn't seek to almost other the experience of people who aren't involved in the administration of running the organisation. So it's a really important and a really big topic. If your outcomes don't resonate with the people that you're working on behalf of, then they're not good outcomes, and you have to always build in a kind of check and balance on that. Just before I close, really briefly, Duncan, I'm giving you my stern face. Is there one golden rule that you would like to... Is there anything you want people to leave with that's come from a question saying, is there one golden rule for this? It's a hard question.
Yeah, that's not really a quick one, is it? But I guess from a leader's perspective, I think you have to be okay with changing your mind as you go and listening. So, you know, I often sort of go in, I'm quite solution focused, I think we should do this, but I know we need to talk to people. And it's often hard to kind of change that mindset of actually we should be over here. But I think the thing that I've kind of learnt from this is that the richness is in other people, not me. So it's about being open to listen, I think.
Yeah, and it's a journey and not a destination. So, sorry. Oh.
More practicalities. How much time should you set aside for the theory of change process?
Yeah, interesting. So I think, again, probably it all depends on organisation stage. And, you know, we were doing quite a lot in Northpoint to bring the organisation up from an infrastructure point of view. We, you know, developed the leadership structure as we went. And so we've been kind of working on this probably for, 2.5 years. And I would say we've probably got another 2 years to go. But part of that is because actually, just about to say, the theory of change is easy. The hard bit is then getting the data to then be able to bring that evidence that you are actually making the impact. So we've done, I think, quite well with the theory of change work. That's been quite solid in our thinking. The work that is now taking its time is changing the mindset of our colleagues and our systems to be allowed to get the right data to then inform our impact work.
Yeah, so it's very context.
So I think we're definitely, you know, it's probably 5 years to go from where we were to where we want to be.
I mean,
would say.
You could do a theory of change process in 10 to 12 weeks if you wanted, but it wouldn't necessarily embed and be everybody on the journey, but we just talked about. Thank you very much. Duncan and I...